Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing amazing. The entire history of Athens. I'm Shields. This is what we do. We do history content. So let's see the entire history of Athens.
Athens, the cradle of Western civilization. This city is not only the birthplace of democracy, but has also been home to some of the greatest minds that have ever lived, arguably contributing more to the world in terms of developments in science, philosophy, and the arts than any other place on the planet.
We're about to see.
However, despite these illustrious achievements, much of Athens' history has been marked by periods of obscurity, disruption, decline, and rebirth, as the city transitioned between the control of several foreign powers over the course of centuries and millennia. So, how did this city rise from relative insignificance in the ancient world to shape many of the founding principles, institutions, and ideas that govern the modern nations we live in today? This is the history of Athens.
Notice this isn't the history of ancient Greece. This is the history of Athens. So we're going to talk specifically about the city-state, the metropolitan area.
Just to let you know that some of the historic maps featured in our videos are now available for purchase through Love the Personal and Bring population. People gradually began to establish period.
Whoops.
Athens has been home to human populations since the Neolithic period, around 7000 BC. Over time, people gradually began to establish the first permanent settlements with the advent of farming over 5,000 years ago.
Wow.
One of the earliest sites of human habitation was located atop a large, imposing flat rock, which eventually developed into a center of religious and political activity and became the...
So the Acropolis is where things centered around. And it makes sense, you look at Rome, you have the 7 hills. People really like to stay on hills because it gives you, an ability to see far away for possible invasions, or become, a central point for migration and or trade. But then also, like, for economic reasons, well, not economic reasons, but practical reasons, for like the environment. If it rains, you don't want to be in the ravine, right? Because if you don't want to get flooded. You have so many different reasons. But nevertheless, let's keep watching.
Focal point of ancient Athenian civilization, the Acropolis. By 1412 BC, this early settlement had been absorbed into the first large-scale civilization to
This should be the Mycenaeans.
emerge across mainland Greece, the Mycenaeans. During this period of increasing urbanization, technological advancement, and cultural sophistication, Athens transformed from a modest settlement into a significant center of trade and power within the ancient Mediterranean world.
And I think a lot of the Mycenaeans brought forth like inspiration from neighboring Crete, which is the Minoan culture, and some of the Eastern Mediterranean pre-Bronze Age collapse culture. A lot of that really culminates in the city-states in Athens and so forth.
Although not as prominent as larger Mycenaean palatial states, such as Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, Athens shared many of the early cultural traits that would later define classical Greek civilization. The city is first attested in recorded texts from around the 13th century BC, where it is referred to as Athenae. It was supposedly named after the ancient Greek goddess Athena, who, according to myth, gifted the city an olive tree in exchange for its patronage.
They love their olives.
The Mycenaean period lasted for approximately 7 centuries before it, along with many other ancient civilizations of the Mediterranean, came to an abrupt and somewhat mysterious end around 1100 BC. This event, known to history as the Late Bronze Age collapse, saw Athens, along with much of Greece, enter a period of decline marked by the abandonment of many grand Mycenaean palaces and the erosion of the administrative structures that had defined the era.
Right, and I've said this 1,000 times, but we'll say it again. This obviously didn't happen in one day. This happened over probably decades, and it was through environmental reasons, most likely, that culminated towards, famine. And then famine and resource rich areas become dry. Trade empires fall because of protectionism. I am not really good at talking today. But by protecting their own people, fewer exports occur, and then the people that are not getting these exports, they usually have to migrate, and then you have abandoned cities. Then you get things like marauders because of said things. Marauding usually only happens. People aren't just marauders, right? Like even the Vikings, they didn't just like go, you know, do their thing. They did it for a reason. Their resource there's a gap in their resource development. So because of that, the marauders most likely, or the sea peoples, most likely came from this area, and it's most likely, my theory, my hypothesis is a lot of the places that were not getting their exports, places that are export reliant, meaning import reliant. I don't know what I'm thinking. A lot of the import reliant places, they basically they weren't getting their imports, and then they were like, okay, let's go get our imports. So then they are attacking much of the Levant and Egypt and so forth. And yeah, that's my theory.
The collapse of Mycenaean civilization marked the beginning of the Greek Dark Ages, a period characterized by political fragmentation, population decline, and the loss of written records. Athens, however, appears to have endured this decline without suffering complete destruction or abandonment, unlike many of its contemporaries, and managed to maintain a population, albeit at a much lower level. Accompanying this decline was the loss of the Greek writing system, meaning that ancient Greek mythology and poetry were preserved only through oral tradition. It was during this time that the Homeric epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were first composed in oral form, preserving memories of the Mycenaean world even as new political and social realities took shape. The overall reduction in the political and social dynamics of the region led to the emergence of smaller, kin-based communities, where power was vested in the hands of local leaders. This decentralized political structure laid the groundwork for the later development of the polis, or city-state, which would become the defining political unit of ancient Greece. The losses associated with the Greek Dark Ages led to an entire chapter of ancient Greek history fading into obscurity. Records, information, and identities of individuals simply vanished. But in our where,
I knew this was an ad.
and sponsored by audience to aim and even real of the remove feature on your behalf. See how. If you want a code, over time, Athens began to experience signs of renewal as it transitioned out of the Dark Ages and into what is now known as the Archaic period.
Yep, so the Archaic periods, basically I think the Archaic period starts, we're going to have to see if this is what I remember, with a lot of migration.
Around 800 BC. Trade networks with the Near East and Egypt were re-established, bringing new ideas and technologies, including the adoption of the Phoenician writing system, which led to the development of a new Greek alphabet and the revival of literacy. New laws, religious texts, and poetry were recorded in written form, ensuring that the oral traditions, which had sustained Greek culture for centuries, could now be preserved for future generations. During this time, the city also began to evolve politically. It had traditionally been ruled by a monarch in one form or another, but by the 8th century BC, power had shifted to an oligarchy controlled by aristocratic families. The king was gradually replaced by a group of powerful magistrates known as archons, who administered the city and upheld the interests of the nobility. The Athenians also expanded their territory to encompass other settlements across the region of Attica, creating the largest and wealthiest state on the Greek mainland.
So, yeah, so basically all that area is technically Athens, and you become more aligned to your polis. So, like, you might not live in Athens itself, but you are Athenian because you are in the sphere of influence of Athens. Same thing for like Sparta, same thing for other city-states, but that's kind of like how it went.
However, this expansion also resulted in a growing class of people excluded from political life by the ruling elite. This exclusive rule by the aristocracy bred resentment among the lower classes, and during the 7th and 6th centuries BC, Athens was marked by a series of political crises and social unrest. One of the first major figures to attempt to address Athens' growing inequalities was Draco, who, Around 621 BC,
So Draco kicks the democracy off.
introduced the city's first written legal code. Draco's laws were notoriously harsh, with many offences punishable by death, hence the origin of the term draconian. These laws largely favoured the aristocracy and failed to resolve the tensions within Athenian society. Following Draco, the Archon Solon implemented a sweeping series of reforms aimed at easing class conflict in 594 BC. He abolished debt slavery, restructured the class system based on wealth rather than birth, and laid the foundations for broader political participation.
So besides birth, it's more about wealth. So I guess you get a little bit of meritocracy there. Not entirely, because wealth is usually driven by birth. So it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, even though you do it's the door is slightly ajar now for democracy, total democracy.
He divided Athenian citizens into 4 property-based classes, with the wealthiest eligible for high office, and the poorest allowed to participate in the assembly, known as the ecclesia. Although Solon's reforms planted the seeds of change by challenging the aristocracy's exclusive dominance, they failed to eliminate the factional rivalries that plagued Athenian politics.
And that's kind of how you do it. You got to compromise. You got to go slow. You got to crawl. Then you got to walk. Then you got to run. Because, any quick change is like, all right, let's go full out democracy. Let's change this class system. Let's create it 100% on meritocracy. That's going to create such ripples. You're probably going to get thrown out, and you're going to end up something like the Gracchi because of that. But it's kind of like a stepping stone.
As a result, Athens soon fell under the rule of Pisistratus, who seized power in 561 BC. Pisistratus's rule was not entirely oppressive. He maintained many of Solon's reforms and promoted economic growth and trade. However, after his death in 527 BC, his sons, Hippias and Hipparchus, attempted to continue his dynasty, but their rule became increasingly unpopular. When Hipparchus was assassinated, Hippias responded with repression, leading to his eventual overthrow in 510 BC. This paved the way for the most significant political transformation in Athenian history, the rise of democracy under Cleisthenes in
Okay.
508 BC. Athens' political structure was radically reorganized, breaking the power of noble families by creating new administrative divisions based on geography rather than birth. Cleisthenes' reforms expanded citizen participation in government, established the Council of 500 to oversee legislation, and introduced ostracism, a mechanism to prevent any one individual from seizing too much power. These changes
So of course, ostracism, we know that as like being ostracized. That word is still survived to today, as a lot of these Greek words have survived to today. So you can see like the basis of a lot of these ideologies have really survived the test of time, 2,000 plus years. So you get a little bit more closer to that golden age of democracy now.
transformed Athens into a more inclusive, participatory city-state, setting the stage for the democratic experiment that would define the classical era. The dawn of the 5th century BC saw Athens reach the pinnacle of its cultural, political, and military achievements. Although the city was unique in its democratic political infrastructure, it shared a broader Greek identity with contemporary city-states scattered across the Mediterranean world. This shared sense of values, culture, and language led the Athenians to send troops to aid the Ionian Greeks of Asia Minor in 499 BC.
By the way, you see all those in the you see all those up there in the Black Sea? It's crazy.
Who were rebelling against the Persian Empire, which had seized control of the region in the previous century. This provoked the Persians to launch an invasion of mainland Greece, triggering a series of conflicts known as the Persian Wars in 490 BC. The first major confrontation, the Battle of Marathon, fought that same year, saw the advancing Persian army of Emperor Darius I defeated by a force predominantly made up of Athenian hoplites. This battle gave rise to the legend that a messenger named Phidippides ran the 26 miles from the battlefield to Athens to announce the Greek victory.
And now, how many miles is a marathon? It's 26 miles.
Thereby inspiring the modern marathon race.
Crazy.
Despite their defeat, The Persians returned with another invasion force in 480 BC, led by Darius' son, Xerxes. They overcame the small Greek army defending the pass at Thermopylae and simultaneously defeated a Greek naval force at the Battle of Artemisium in July of that year. With the road to Athens now open, many of the citizens' inhabitants fled as the Persian army approached. The Persians eventually captured Athens and destroyed much of the city. However, the Athenian navy remained intact, and, along with their Greek allies, they launched a decisive counterattack, destroying the Persian fleet at the Battle of Salamis in September.
And probably one of the craziest, most impactful naval victories in the history of the world is the Battle of Salamis. And we've done a couple of videos on that. One of my favorites, the one that we did for of the epic history. So go check that one out. But it is just amazing to see the response by the Greek people here. Not just the Athenians, but the Greek people, their response in a coalition to defeat Xerxes after what has transpired, because they were truly an underdog at that point.
September 480 BC. This victory allowed the Greeks to go on the offensive, and by 479 BC, they had successfully driven the Persians out of Greece entirely.
Crazy.
In the aftermath of the Persian Wars, Athens became the leader of the Delian League, a coalition of Greek city-states formed to continue the fight against the Persians in Asia.
And there's a lot of leagues that occur throughout this next couple hundred years.
Over time, however, Athens began to use the League for its own imperial ambitions, demanding tribute and asserting control over the other member states. This led to the establishment of the Athenian Empire, greatly expanding Athens' influence across the eastern Mediterranean and ushering in a golden age for the city. Under the leadership of Pericles, from 461 BC to 429 BC, Athens flourished as a center of arts, philosophy, and literature. This era saw the construction of some of Athens' most famous architectural marvels, including the Parthenon, completed in 438 BC. It was also a period of great literary achievement, with playwrights such as Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus producing works that have endured for centuries and are still performed today. Athens' cultural zenith was further marked by the establishment of the first public theatre, the
Open-air theater, have you?
Theatre of Dionysus, and the beginning of a tradition of public intellectual life that would shape Western thought. Socrates, the founder of Western philosophy, began his work in Athens' Agora, engaging in discussions on ethics, knowledge, and the nature of virtue. His influence continued through his student Plato, who founded the Academy in 387 BC, the first institution of higher education in the Western world, where subjects such as biology, geography, astronomy, mathematics, and history were taught. While Athens' golden age brought great wealth and power to the city and its empire, it also led to tensions with other Greek states, particularly Sparta, which had formed its own rival alliance system known as the Peloponnesian League. By 431 BC, these tensions had boiled over.
And by the way, you see that, by the way? Athens is kind of like in terms of territory, the smaller side here. Of course, they have a lot more influence through their Delian League. But so you got the Peloponnesian League versus the Delian League. Athens controls a ton of that sea. Then, of course, the Peloponnesian Wars are going to undergo at this point. And also, probably the another thing to mention, this is the time where Assassin's Creed Odyssey really takes place.
With the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War, which pitted Athens and its overseas empire against a coalition of land-based states led by Sparta. The war lasted for nearly 3 decades and was defined by the contrasting military strategies of the two city-states: Sparta, with its superior land forces, and Athens with its powerful navy. The conflict initially favored the Athenians, but internal strife gradually weakened the city before its forces were decisively defeated in a naval engagement at the Battle of Aegospotami in 405 BC. The years following Athens' defeat in the Peloponnesian War were marked by a decline in its power and influence, leading to a period of oligarchic rule and the temporary suspension of democracy.
So that's interesting. So they'd suspend democracy, maybe to safeguard a lot of Athens there, I'm guessing.
Athens never regained the dominance it had achieved during the previous century, and was soon eclipsed by the rising power of Macedonia under King Philip II.
Yeah, and that's where things really start to turn on its head, and Athens becomes, and that's the sad thing, Athens really becomes not a backwater by any means, but more or less like a pilgrimage at that point. And you're gonna see a lot of places in the future, like Romans, go to Athens, and they're gonna be like, "Yo, what happened here?" I think it was Octavian that said something similar like that. I think it was Octavian.
Although Athens attempted to resist Macedonian hegemony in 338 BC, after the Battle of Chaeronea, it was forced to accept Macedonian control, thereby marking the end of the city-state's political independence. During the reign of King Philip II and those of his son, Alexander the Great, Athens lost much of its prominence as the Macedonian Empire expanded eastward into the territory of the Persian Empire. However, after Alexander's death in 323 BC, and the subsequent division of its vast empire among his generals, Athens, like many other Greek city-states, briefly entertained the hope of regaining its freedom. Yet, by the following year, one of Alexander's generals and the regent of Macedon, Antipater, crushed the Athenian uprising and re-established the Macedonian influence, formally marking the end of Athens' nearly 200-year-long period as the pioneer of democracy.
And then you're gonna have this system all the way up to the Roman control, I'm pretty sure.
The next 2 centuries saw Athens become entangled in the wider disputes over territory between the successor kingdoms of Alexander the Great's empire, namely Macedonia, the Ptolemaic dynasty, and the Seleucid Empire. However, it would be the rapidly expanding Roman Republic that would eventually dominate the contest for influence in the region, bringing all of Greece under its rule after the conclusion of the Macedonian Wars in 146 BC. Despite this new and altogether different form of...
I love this artistic style right here, by the way. I've seen it in so many different videos. I really like it.
Political subjugation, Athens remained a symbol of Greek culture and intellectual heritage. The Romans, who themselves were influenced by the many great minds Athens had produced throughout the classical and Hellenistic periods, sent many of their children to study philosophy, rhetoric, and the arts in the city's famed institutions.
So basically becomes an Oxford, or like I said, like a pilgrimage of knowledge.
As part of their effort to emulate and continue Athens' cultural legacy. Although Athens was no longer an autonomous power, its strategic location and historical significance ensured its continued importance within the Roman Republic and the empire that followed. During the Roman period, many emperors showed a particular affinity for Athens, often providing the funding for the construction of impressive architectural projects. Emperor Hadrian, who ruled during the early 2nd century AD, contributed significantly to the city's physical and cultural renewal. He built a monumental library complex, which bore his name, in 132 AD, as well as a gymnasium, several temples and sanctuaries, a bridge, an aqueduct, which is still in use to this day,
Really?
and finally completed the Temple of Olympian Zeus, which had begun construction in the 6th century BC. By this,
That's impressive. That's a 600 year construction project.
2nd and 3rd centuries AD, Athens had become an increasingly cosmopolitan city, drawing not only other Greeks and Romans, but also individuals from across the wider empire.
So it becomes a melting pot. Okay.
The city had largely retained its native Greek religious practices, but this period saw a surge in the adoption of Christianity, which had begun to spread across the Roman world and slowly replace the traditional Greco-Roman form of worship. The rise of Christianity would eventually mark a turning point in the cultural and religious identity of Athens.
Yeah, because of course previously it was very much a paganistic Greek mythology. That's where where you get a lot of the Roman mythology is from Greek mythology. So this a lot, it kind of like starts to replace the traditional means of the zeitgeist of Greek religion.
In the 4th century AD, as the Roman Empire transitioned into the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Constantine initiated the gradual process of adopting Christianity as the official state religion, leaving behind the old Greco-Roman pagan beliefs to fade into obscurity. This religious change was also compounded by the rise of Constantinople as the new capital of the Byzantine Empire in 330 AD, which took away what little remained of Athens' political and cultural significance in the region. Over the following centuries of early Byzantine rule, many of the pagan-founded intellectual institutions and sites of worship that had made Athens one of the most prominent cities in the ancient world were either abandoned or converted into Christian churches.
And that's usually what happens. You have a great building, cathedral, whatever it could be. It's just converted. And you'll see this in whenever the Muslims take over, it'll be converted into a mosque, usually.
The city effectively became an insignificant provincial town within the Byzantine Empire during this period, and consequently was not afforded the same level of political stability or military protection that it had been granted in the past. Athens faced numerous challenges from barbarian invasions, internal strife, and changing political dynamics that lasted well into the 12th century. By the dawn of the 13th century, the Byzantine Empire as a whole had been dramatically weakened following the rise of the Seljuk Turks in the east and the subsequent military responses of many Western European Christian kingdoms, which launched a series of crusades to retake the Holy Land. In 1202, the Fourth Crusade was launched, with the intent of recapturing the Muslim-controlled city of Jerusalem by first defeating the powerful Egyptian Ayyubid Sultanate. The Crusaders sought transportation across the Mediterranean from the Venetians. However, the series of economic and political events resulted in the intended destination of the crusade shifting from Egypt to Constantinople. The Byzantine capital was subsequently besieged and sacked by the Crusader army in 1204.
Yeah, just a very weird time. The 11th and 12th century, sorry. The 11th, 12th, and 13th century is just a weird time for this region because you're kind of like sandwiched in this region. And you also say this for the Balkans. You're kind of sandwiched between Christendom and the rising caliphates in the east.
With the empire later being divided to form several smaller states across the region, with Athens becoming the epicenter of the new eponymous Duchy of Athens.
Oh.
In the wake of the Fourth Crusade, Athens saw the establishment of Frankish rule, which significantly altered the political and social landscape of the city. It was governed by a series of Latin lords, often from French and Italian noble families, who replaced the traditional Byzantine administrative system with their own Western feudal practices. The Dukes of Athens ruled over the local Greek population and asserted their power by constructing prominent fortifications, such as the Acropolis fortress, which dominated the city's skyline. The remaining years of the medieval period were a highly unstable and often violent time in the history of Athens. The city passed into the hands of numerous foreign powers, including a group of Catalonian mercenaries and a faction of Italian noblemen, before eventually coming under Venetian control. The Ottoman Empire, which had begun its rapid rise to prominence in the 1300s, expanded into the Aegean Sea during the 15th century.
And then it's a slow, inevitable death of Western Athens in this period for a little bit until they get it back,
threatening the valuable Venetian trading hubs in the region, including Athens. A series of wars, lasting intermittently for nearly 3 centuries, broke out between the Venetians and Ottomans for control over the eastern Mediterranean. In 1458, Sultan Mehmed II finally conquered the city, ushering in a new period in Athens history that would last for almost 400 years. Under Ottoman rule, Athens, like many other towns and cities formerly under Byzantine or Venetian control, saw Islam imposed upon its predominantly Orthodox Greek population by the new Turkish elite.
And this is interesting because you have a paganistic society that's turned Christian, that now is turned Muslim, and it's the same story that you hear throughout the Greek the region as well as the Balkans. It's just such a reoccurring parallel and such a shared history amongst all of these individual kingdoms and states in the region. So what we're seeing here, we also have to zoom out, and we see a lot there as well.
Although the Ottomans introduced a new administrative framework, with an Ottoman governor overseeing the city, they allowed a degree of religious autonomy, enabling the Greek Orthodox Church to maintain its influence, though ultimately under Ottoman supervision. Islamic mosques were built, marking the shift in the religious and cultural landscape of the city, and the Parthenon, which had been a Catholic church under Venetian rule, was converted into a mosque.
As I said, most of the places that were, most churches were converted to mosques. Most.
As time passed, a resurgent Venice began to launch military expeditions against the Ottoman Empire in an effort to recapture some of its former territories. This prompted the Ottomans to transform Athens into a strategic military outpost, used to control the southern Greek peninsula. The Acropolis was fortified with new walls and towers, and the Parthenon, despite its earlier conversion into a mosque, was repurposed to store the city's gunpowder in the 17th century.
That's kind of risky, I would say.
This had dramatic consequences in 1687, when a Venetian force besieging Athens fired a mortar shell onto the Parthenon, detonating the gunpowder stored within.
I didn't even know about this. That's such a sad story.
The resulting explosion completely destroyed the building's roof and most of its walls, leaving the Parthenon in the ruinous state it remains in today.
Oh, they are rebuilding it, repurposing it, right? Today. They are basically trying to put it in a fashion which is respectable.
The dawn of the 18th century saw a degree of economic recovery for Athens, as the Ottoman Empire entered a period of relative stability.
It's like a festival out in the countryside of Athens here.
The city's population began to grow again, with Greeks from other parts of the Ottoman Empire settling in Athens to take advantage of economic opportunities. Despite this economic upswing, Athens remained politically insignificant in the broader context of the Ottoman Empire. The city was still viewed as a small provincial outpost, and its former status as a cultural and intellectual hub had largely been forgotten. However, Athens' ancient ruins and classical architecture did attract some interest from European travelers during the Age of Enlightenment, many of whom sought to study or acquire ancient Greek artifacts. One infamous and controversial incident occurred in the early 1800s, when the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Lord Elgin, orchestrated the removal of several ancient sculptures from the Parthenon and transported them to Britain to be housed in the British Museum.
Love-hate relationship with the British Museum. Love it for all the amazing work they do to preserve. Hate it because they do it in some impractical, partial ways that maybe aren't the best in terms of like humanitarian. What do you guys think about that? What do you guys think about the British Museum? Let me know below.
Where they remain to this day.
Yeah.
By the
Why aren't they in Athens? Couldn't tell me. I don't know.
early 19th century, the Ottoman Empire had begun to show signs of disintegration, with regional rebellions and revolutions taking hold. Sensing an opportunity to throw off their Ottoman overlords, the Greeks launched a war of independence in 1821, and Athens, like the rest of the country, was swept up in the revolutionary fervor. The city experienced significant conflict and destruction during the 8-Year War, as Greek rebels fought against Ottoman forces. Following a series of military interventions by Britain, France, and Russia, as well as a negotiated peace settlement in 1829, the Greeks finally took control of Athens from the Ottomans in 1833.
That's huge. And I didn't know when this occurred, so 1833 is when it got switched back. Okay.
This marked the arrival of Prince Otto of Bavaria in that same year, who entered the city to take up his newly appointed position as king of the now independent Kingdom of Greece, with Athens as its capital. At the time of Greece's independence, Athens was little more than a modest town with a population
Yeah, we need to learn more about the Kingdom of Greece.
of around 10,000. The decision to make it the capital was largely symbolic, chosen for its association with ancient Greek culture and its historical significance.
I mean, it's kind of like when you did what's it called? When Italy got unified. Rome only made sense, so Athens only made sense here.
However, the city lacked the infrastructure and resources necessary for a modern capital. Under King Otto, significant urban development was undertaken, with efforts to modernize the city's infrastructure, including the construction of new public buildings, the introduction of European architectural styles, and the establishment of essential public services. Over the remaining years of the
Nice looking building there.
19th century, Athens began to flourish as the Kingdom of Greece found its footing. The city's growth was driven by the construction of key landmarks, such as the National Archaeological Museum, the Zappeion Hall, and the Panathenaic Stadium, which was revived to host the first modern Olympic Games in 1896.
That's cool.
By the turn of the 20th century, Athens was a city on the rise, undergoing further modernization.
What a picture! What a photograph right there.
With the construction of new neighborhoods, wide boulevards, and public squares to accommodate its ever-increasing population. However, much of this progress was undone following the outbreak of the Second World War and the subsequent occupation of the city by Axis forces in 1941. The following 3 years were marked by extreme hardship for the city's inhabitants, with widespread starvation, economic ruin, and political repression. Although Athens was liberated in 1944, the city soon faced further conflict as fighting erupted between Greek communists and Greek nationalists in a civil war. With peace restored by 1950, Athens underwent significant economic recovery and industrialization, transforming the city over the following decades. Despite further political disruption during the military junta period of the late 1960s and early 1970s, Athens continued its trajectory of revival into the 21st century, achieving a major milestone in 2004 when it once again hosted the Olympic Games. Although the city has faced significant challenges in recent times due to severe economic austerity, it continues to embody the spirit of resilience and renewal that has remained unextinguished since its founding in ancient times.
Once again, these videos are so awesome, man, because they just give you such a thorough history of a certain topic, whether it be a country or a region or a city-state or a city itself as Athens. Athens is, first off, definitely return all the relics and stuff from the British Museum and anywhere else to Greece, unless there's 100% like, unless the Greek authorities say you can keep it for reasons, or we can go back and forth. But you know, a lot of times some artifacts go on tour and they go here, then they go here, just so like a broader world can view said, because not everyone can go. So like people of England can't really always go to Greece, but more or less it definitely needs to be in some sort of like fashion where it can go back and forth at the bare minimum. But yeah, I want to learn more about Greece itself, not just Athens, but understanding kind of like the geopolitical divide that occurred over the last 2,600 years and so forth. And then the people that were part of that golden age and how democracy kind of undertook itself in the last 2,600 years. And yeah, so much more. Leave me some context down below. I appreciate you. Peace out. Bye-bye.